Hey, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. We're going to talk about something today. Come on up, my friend. A pretty exciting topic: smart cities and technology, and how all of that's all converging with out of home, and how we're going to all be able to, we hope, find new opportunities in the years ahead. Gordon Feller is with me today. Hi, Gordon. How are you?
Good morning.
Gordon is with an organization called Meeting of the Minds. It's an organization he founded out in the Bay Area, San Francisco, so in the think tank of America. Gordon is certainly one of the, if not the nation's leading expert in smart cities. And so we were really excited to have Gordon work on a project with us late last year where he wrote a white paper for OAAA on out of home and the potential of smart city technology. And if you are interested, that white paper is available at the OAAA website for immediate download at any time. So I would hope that you take a look at that. We're going to talk a little bit about the themes in that paper today. And then Gordon and I also, we did a session in Washington, D.C. at the Truman? Wilson. The other president.
Smithsonian's Wilson Center, right?
Yeah. At the Wilson Center, Woodrow Wilson Center, we did a Smart Cities symposium for a day, and some of you were there. I think it was a great session. So we thought we would want to bring it back, take it on the road, and share it with you folks today. So Gordon, thanks for joining us today. We're glad to have you here. So we're gonna have a little conversation about the smart city, what it means, defining it. And then we're going to talk about the opportunities that out of home has becoming linked with that opportunity, and what's happening today, and what some of the potential opportunities might be in the years ahead. So Gordon, so maybe we should start by just sort of defining for our audience really what is a smart city? What are we talking about when we're talking about a smart city?
Well, and the answer to that question will help explain why so many out-of-home companies and technology companies are working together to enable so many thousands of cities to adopt these new technologies. So smart city is essentially a city ideal. It's the tomorrow scenario where technology enables city systems, fundamental core services, water, transport, energy, building systems, as well as outdoor information systems and advertising systems to all become intelligent, to all become sensed, to be connected to the supercomputer wherever my iPhone is, to be connected to the resident or the visitor who's moving around the city in a car, bus, train, on foot, wherever. But the idea of the smart city is to connect those dots and to make it possible for that person to have access to those services in real time, or for the city management or the utility manager to manage those city services more intelligently by having access to the data about the real conditions in the real world at that moment. So it's a real-time capacity enabled by digital technology that makes the city different, hopefully better. Cities hope it's cheaper to manage the city that way. Cities hope that ultimately the urban environment becomes cleaner and greener because there are better energy efficiency choices that are available, let's say, to a building owner. So those are the characteristics of a smart city. There aren't really any smart cities in the world yet, although many claim this in their marketing. They do a very effective job marketing themselves as smart cities, but they're in categories that they've tackled the problem. Some of them tackled it first in transport or in public safety. Now, of course, the Chinese are pushing very hard to turn their cities into very information rich because they're surveilling the city, and they're actually now providing a rating to every citizen, a social rating that says how good a citizen are you based on your behavior in the city. That's not what we're seeing here.
That's not here.
That's not what we're seeing here. That's not necessarily your business. But there are other sort of flavors of smart city development. If you go to Singapore, it's a very intelligent city that knows who you are, where you're standing, not necessarily because it's surveilling you, but they're trying to understand how many people are at X street corner because they want to move traffic more efficiently. And that's one reason why Singapore is so well managed and profitable as a city.
Well, so then let's talk about the 900-pound gorilla in the room. That's all great. That's good for cities, good for citizens, good for us as citizens. But what about us as media companies? So how does out of home, a business that provides display advertising in cities, both digital and static, how does out of home become part of that narrative, and how do we contribute to the smart city?
Well, the how is, of course, possible now because the cost of everything is moving towards zero. The cost of compute, the cost of storage, the cost of connectivity. That's the dirty little secret in the tech industry, which is why those big tech companies invaded the advertising space, because there wasn't a lot of money to be made in the technology itself, because all those costs are moving to zero. So now the out-of-home advertising industry can move into the very advanced digital technology because it's inexpensive. And the question is, are your assets on the street, on the highway, in the buildings, outside the buildings, in all the various locations, in bus shelters, are those advertising assets ready for the digital revolution? Because, of course, when the digital wave comes through an industry, it tends to disrupt. I mean, how many of us know a travel agent? How many of us buy LPs, and most under 30 don't even know what an LP is in the music business. So the reality is that we're not in the same game that we were in a lot of those industries, and soon in the out-of-home industry. And so how we get engaged is to figure out, does the city really want to make investments in this area? Is it all going to be based on ad revenue, or are there other options? And where do your companies stand in relation to the way that the city, who will often be the gatekeeper because they have power to permit whether or not this happens or that happens on their city streets? Now, if you're talking about a building owner, that might be a different type of decision that has to be made. But even if it's outdoor, in most cities, the city government has a significant role in figuring out what they want to see in the outdoor environment. And they are very strict about having their regulations complied with. And especially after the digitization of the taxi industry by Uber and Lyft and the other transportation network companies that compete with those two giants, many cities are now very nervous about what happens when the digital wave comes through their city in the next industry. Because it has been very disruptive. It's created a lot of new choices for commuters to have Uber and Lyft and the other TNCs. But talk to somebody who runs a taxi fleet and who paid $250,000 for a medallion. There have been a series of 5 or 6 suicides in New York City because the price and the value of those medallions has moved steadily towards zero. So when cities look at digitization of the out-of-home industry, they're looking to understand better what value proposition you, who may own the asset, are offering to the city or offering to the citizens. Are you providing wayfinding? Are you providing the capacity to do real-time emergency alert? Are you helping with traffic flows? Because the sensor on your digital ad platform is able to track the flow of pedestrians or vehicles. All sorts of interesting conversations are now happening.
So it's a trade-off, is what we're talking about.
There's a deal that has to be made.
There's a deal. So the answer, or the question the answer is, what is it that out of home can provide to the city? What extra amenities can we provide?
Think of it as extra eyes and ears.
Yeah.
So the city, many cities are a big footprint geographically, and a lot of activity, a lot of economic activity, a lot of physical activity with the movement of goods and people. And most cities have a very primitive understanding of what's happening on the street at any given moment. Those little rubber things that they put in the street, they do it maybe in a couple of streets every week in different parts of the city to get a very poor estimation of how much. They can't even tell what kind of vehicle it is. They just know the number of tires that flow over. Is it a 4-wheel vehicle, a 2-wheel vehicle, a 6-wheel vehicle, an 8-wheel vehicle? Who knows? So bottom line is, the city needs more eyes and ears. They do have some assets that they own in some cases, like the outdoor streetlights. But most often utility poles are owned by utilities. And the utility is usually not city-owned. LA, DPW, DWP, Department of Water and Power, that's an exception.
So cities are really looking for help. They're looking for private business, private enterprise to come in like an out-of-home company and fund something.
And Link NYC in New York City, which was the first manifestation of this digital out-of-home in the form of the kiosk, was a quick solution to a problem. They had essentially dead spots, which were the old payphones. Think, when's the last time you used a payphone? But they had the utility connection, and they had prime real estate on the street corner, and they were underutilized or totally unutilized. And Mayor Bloomberg's deputy mayor, who became the head of Sidewalk Labs, Dan Doctoroff, and the chairman of Intersection, made a proposition, which was we will take this on and share the ad revenue. And so then they needed somebody to come along and make that happen.
Yeah, the city needed help in finding someone who would fund the build out of the Wi-Fi network, which Intersection did in exchange for the advertising. But what I guess you're talking about eyes and ears, what other people don't realize, I think, there's more to the Intersection piece than
it's not just what you
wayfinding.
See, it's what they see too.
Yeah, there's cameras in those units, each looking each way, monitoring the sidewalks at all times. There's listening devices. I don't know if you know that they have listening devices in those units, and so if there's a gunshot somewhere in town, they can use several of the kiosks to triangulate the exact pinpoint location of where that gunshot was fired from, and then deploy police immediately. So there are other sort of behind the curtain benefits that those kiosks provide to the city, to law enforcement, and to the fire department, and to EMTs in New York. And I guess we're seeing that start to roll out in other places as there's new entrants to the market, Oath and some other companies.
And there are lots of interesting variations on the theme, different flavors, depending on what you want. Now, what Sidewalk has proposed in Toronto, as some of you have heard, is a really ambitious greenfield, unlike, let's say, Link NYC, which was more of a brownfield. They did put a new unit there. They did design it new, they did put new technology, and they aggregated some existing technology. But the sidewalk scenario with Intersection's help is much different in Toronto, because there you have hundreds of acres on the waterfront, and they're going to turn it into a mini city, which will have all of that sensing capacity to sense who and where and what and when, and even intention. They're looking at the intention of an actor. Where are they going, likely? So that we know what their destination is. Because knowing point A, where somebody is good. It's really good to know where point B is, because you can offer a promotion. If I'm going from A to B and I'm standing in front of a kiosk, it's really interesting to be able to know where are they heading, because then my sponsor advertiser wants to provide you with a promotion to stop along the way.
Well, Toronto's interesting because it does sort of bring in a new sort of level to the relationship and the partnership. And one of the things I was thinking about as we got ready for this is, you could really, as we start thinking about applying out-of-home's capabilities to the smart city, you can break apart the asset from the amenity, really, right? I mean, there's no reason that it has to be a kiosk, that the amenity has to be tied specifically.
As long as the technology can be hung.
Yeah.
And it's not a very technical phrase, but hanging the technology is essentially what the engineers talk about.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's on the outdoor street light, and sometimes it's on the traffic light, and sometimes it's on the parking meter, and sometimes it's in the parking space because you want to sense which ones are open. So this is what the cities are now looking at, is all the assets that they control either directly through ownership or indirectly because of regulation. They're trying to figure out which of those assets can help the city become more intelligent and digitized. And you are crucial in that story, and cities are coming to realize this.
And cities need money. That's really the name of the game here, right? They're looking for partners because they need money, they need help funding these things. So to that point, an out-of-home company could come in, I would think, and say, what do you need? And they could say, we need this. And the city might say, all right, if you help us build this, if you fund this, you can build as many out-of-home assets over here as you might want.
And let me tell you the story, the most recent story, because we're really involved in it at Meeting of the Minds, is Sacramento. Yeah. So state capital of California, new mayor as of January before this last one. So he's been in office a year and 4 months. He was the president of the California State Senate and understood a lot about California's economy. And Darrell Steinberg said, we have a lot of interesting opportunities. We don't have the expertise as a city on our own to do this by ourselves. we need a different kind of public-private partnership, and the ultimate result of that discussion was a $150 million commitment from Verizon to make this the most digitized city in North America. And they're going to have ubiquitous 5G throughout the city. They're going to have new fiber to every intersection and a lot of new services that the city had wanted to track and monitor flows of cars and other vehicles, for instance, at these intersections. Vision Zero to reduce the contact between pedestrians and bicyclists and motorized vehicles, because there are lots of fatalities at those problematic street corners. And so this is the shape of what's happening, is Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, Sprint, lesser those two, more the last two, more the first two. They're really aggressively out there talking to cities, and they may wind up being your competition.
Yeah, well, you know, and speaking of competition, one of the things I thought was interesting, I just read recently that Duke Electric is getting involved in this area too, and they're partnering with out-of-home companies. So what's the drive for someone like Duke Electric to start to get involved with this conversation and get involved with in cities around the country, cities that aren't really part of their footprint, to get involved with the smart city initiatives and to partner with out-of-home companies?
Yeah, so they are digitizing their industry. I mean, talk about slow industries. You know, if Thomas Edison woke up from his 100+ years of sleep and looked around at the energy industry, at the electricity industry, it pretty much is exactly the same industry that he left when he died 100+ years ago. So there hasn't been a lot of innovation and a lot of progress amongst utilities. They're not exactly the most dynamic, change-oriented organizations. They're very conservative. They've got 20-year horizons on their projects, whether it's power gen or distribution or otherwise. So they've now discovered, especially because of energy efficiency, the power of digital technology. So their revenues are flat or shrinking because of the emergence of independent power producers like you at your home with solar on the roof. That's not profitable for Duke. They, secondly, have come to realize that they're not monetizing the full value of all their assets. They've got all that conduit infrastructure. They've got all above the air wire and pole infrastructure. They are not using it to the full extent, and they know they need to find new revenue sources. And regulators are pushing them in that direction, because regulators are worried that as more people become independent power producers, their ability to fund the modernization of their base load, which everybody depends on, will be weakened. And of course, the utilities are complaining pretty loudly. So they're now looking at, what do they own? They own the physical assets, the transmission and distribution above or underground, and they own the customer. Biggest bill that will be paid by the building owner is probably their energy bill. And as a result, they realize at Duke that they have a different kind of conversation with the building owner or the facility manager or the tenant than somebody else might. And they could bring this to the conversation. Now, the telcos are also thinking that, because they also have the over the air and above and under the ground and the customer ownership. So there might be a struggle between utilities and telcos for your business eventually. That's my own prediction, but it's a wild prediction at this point.
So for our audience today, it sounds like, in addition to starting to have conversations with cities to see how out-of-home companies might be part of the smart city initiative in cities, that we should be talking to the electric companies and the telecoms and seeing how we can also partner with them, because they've got big initiatives themselves going, and perhaps out-of-home can be part of that whole dynamic.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's no question. And, AT&T, Comcast, Time Warner, if they don't become part of AT&T, they may decide to buy some of the out-of-home advertisers, not because they want the physical assets, but because you saw Verizon bought AOL and a bunch of other companies because they're moving deep into advertising. Look, when you own 140 million consumer cell phone users, like Verizon does, you're always thinking about not just delivering 3, 4, or 5 bars wherever you can. That's on the investment side. They're looking at how to monetize that customer, and advertising is crucial. And it's not just going to be on the small screen. It's going to be on the screen on the street, and it's going to be on the screen at home, which is why AT&T wants Time Warner.
Yeah. So obviously, it makes sense to build out the Link unit in Manhattan. But what about the small cities? Is this whole smart city phenomenon really a big city, big market initiative, or Are we seeing these same kinds of build-outs in small towns and cities across America? Is there a city that's too small? Should our industry be focusing on partnering with a certain size city?
Up to now, the answer has been small is not going to be able to take advantage of this because the price points are still real.
Yeah.
I mean, there's still real costs here. Getting the city rewired. So when 5G comes and it becomes available everywhere, and that's not too far away, and in Asia, most of the cities are moving to 5G ubiquitous throughout the whole city, which is expensive for the telcos and the other partners that work with the telcos. When that happens, then it's a lot easier for the city to start lighting up their bus shelters, small towns. So we're working with the city of Spokane. That's 200 and some thousand. They've been economically distressed. They had a hard time recovering from the recession because of their particular situation. They're coming out the other end and they're really embracing this and they're doing well with it. But I think below 200,000 threshold, it's tough. As 5G becomes more ubiquitous, as the cost for getting engaged becomes less, as these partnerships become easier to do, because the first one with Sacramento took months of negotiation because the format and structure of it had to be worked out. I suspect that it'll be a lot easier for cities to sign up. Now, think of Waze. So Waze has 100 million users who are using their app on the phone to find their way around. Now, Waze has a partnership program for cities, big, small, old, new, non-US, US. I think it's almost 600 plus now, and it's a couple of months old, this CCP, City Partnership something, and it's a data sharing thing where Waze essentially makes their data available. Most cities that are under 300,000-400,000 don't have somebody in the IT department who really can figure out how to use that free Waze data set to help the city look at traffic in new ways. Mm-hmm. And so that's, the other part of it is, do I have the staffing capability to negotiate these kinds of agreements or to take advantage of the data that's being generated on the street by all of these cool new sensing capacities that you're going to provide?
Yeah. Does anyone have a question or two they'd like to ask?
So Stephen, hi Stephen, actually we have a schedule change. The session after this with Sheldon Silverman is actually going to be taking place in the next ballroom over. There was a schedule change. So we have time for extended question and answers here, but as we approach 11:30, we just wanted to let you know that the next session that was scheduled for this room will actually be in side stages H and G next door.
And no Bloody Marys in that room?
No Bloody Marys, yeah.
So, you've had your Bloody Marys for the morning. Does
But-
anyone have a question?
Yeah, plenty of time for questions.
We put everybody to sleep.
Yeah, or you answered everything.
That makes a huge amount of sense for a small town with a fiber network to put this right on top of that fiber network. Now, who manages the fiber network for the city or with the city will, be a factor. But if you've got the asset in the ground and you're connecting all the buildings, now the first city to do that was Chattanooga. They're not a huge, rich city. In fact, they were at that moment really poor, but they had the advantage of the EPB, the Electric Power Board, that owned the electric power sector for the city. And they decided to make the investment. It's been a huge boom to the economy in Chattanooga. So small towns can do this maybe because it's an economic development strategy to attract jobs, retain jobs, to reduce brain drain, or maybe it's for new revenue from those added services on top of that digital platform. But that's absolutely, if it's not wireless 5G, it's going to be wired. And fiber is better than that stuff on the street, frankly. Mm-hmm. And Google Fiber will happily take your money. The problem, of course, is they're gonna move. They know a little bit about advertising at Google. $100 billion a year of revenue, of which 97% is from ad revenue. Yeah. So they want to grab your business eventually. So be forewarned.
Over here, Ray.
So a lot of cities are doing RFPs, and some cities are retaining ownership, because they believe that the privatization of a public asset is not a great thing to do anytime. But other cities are happy to get rid of it and to have the liability off their books and to have the maintenance responsibility. The question is, when somebody walks away, what happens then? Company goes bankrupt, company changes their mind and pivots and gets into a new business. And so cities all over the world are navigating this, and there's no perfect formula that everybody's adopted. And that's an open window for you. If you prefer to own the asset because it gives you more control on the day-to-day, even though there's a maintenance responsibility, as J.C. Decaux discovered when they started taking over all those bus shelters in exchange for owning the ad space. They actually have to have crews with mops and with pooper scoopers and all the rest of it to go out to those bus shelters, because the obligation in the contract is they're the cleaning crew. Now, you might be interested in that kind of a scenario because that level of control of being the owner with an obligation to provide a certain quality of service and maintenance gives you more leverage because it's now assets on your books.
There's a lot more involved than just cleaning up as far as the bus shelter goes. Now you've got other technical things that you got to be responsible for.
Including the connectivity. So in that small town where the town owns the fiber, what happens if the fiber provider, connectivity provider, doesn't do their job? And then your advertiser says, hey, we were down 6 hours, and our contract says 99.999 uptime. So those are the issues to navigate. They're all easy to address if you've got agreement by at least two parties.
If Google retains ownership, obviously they've got their own advertising program anyway, so would they not even want to put it out to R&D? They would just be handling themselves?
I don't think Google wants to own the physical asset. Their basic is, we like to own the fiber, we like to own the display rights, but we're not particularly interested in the physical object on the street. And I think Sidewalk, in the case, Sidewalk Labs project proposal, in the case of Toronto is, they're going to own that because this is their proof of concept. This is the first city, greenfield, to do all of those things in one place. There are stories and deployments of other technologies like that in Masdar City in the United Arab Emirates, for instance, in Qatar, gearing up for 2020, which I think is World Cup in their case, and World Expo. But the reality is that it makes some companies uncomfortable to own the physical assets.
And I think there was a unique scenario with Link in New York because, intersection, Titan at the time was in a very unique position. They owned all of those old telephone kiosks, so they basically already had owned and rights to all those easements on those locations. So they plopped the new kiosks on those same locations that the old telephone spots were on. So,
and even though it was relatively easy, there was a lot of bumps on the road.
Well,
and
laying all the new fiber, yeah.
Well, and also there was behavior around the kiosks you may have heard about that was not exactly socially acceptable.
Yeah, you'll learn. Any more questions before we call this panel baked?
And look, we have some slides we didn't show you. So if you're really into this, we'll send you some slides. Don't only read that report, which is helpful, and I hope you'll give us your comments. I'm easy to find, Gordon at Meeting of the Minds. You know where he is all the time in Washington.
And I can get to him easy.
Yes, and so we'd love your comments. We're in this early stage of thinking this through. You're our sounding board, so please don't hesitate to tell us we're on the wrong track, because usually we are.
Yeah. Listen, thank you for being with us this morning. I hope this was enlightening. And again, if you have any questions, certainly reach out to me. I'm happy to help and forward them on to Gordon too. So thank you very much.